Peter, thank you very much for joining us. Let's start with a rundown on what's been a very illustrious career.
Right. Well, I was an electronics nerd when I was when I was a teenager. I early ham radio person, and I saw my first computer. In fact, the only computer in Australia in about 1955, 56, when it was at the University of Melbourne, and by 1961, I was actually working in computing, and I was the weekend service engineer on that computer, which was CSIRAC. I was by then 20 or 21, so 65 years ago, near enough. And I stayed at the university. I did my PhD, and ultimately ended up as the head of Department of Computer Science, as it was then at the university. My other interest, which was because I was at one stage a joint appointment with another department of the university, was strongly on the social implications and impact of computing on society. I could see the problems right from the start in having teachers who were going to have to prepare students where the teachers themselves hadn't had an education in computing. I was also concerned about legal aspects and so on. And so that was a thread that's followed me throughout my time. And I guess I was primarily a computer engineer as such. And although I became a head of a computer science department, really not a software person, and computing in academia moved to software. So, but anyway, I coped, I guess. By 1996, when I was head of department, I decided to start a project to resuscitate this computer, which had been one of the earliest in the world, get it out of museum store and have it recognised for what it is, the only intact computer of the first generation. And that project's gone on to this day in terms of re-establishing or recognising the computer history of Australia, which is pretty illustrious. On the side of this, I was heavily involved in computer planning for what were then the Institute of Colleges before they became universities, RMIT and Swinburne and Caulfield and so on. So I was chair of quite a few committees on computer planning there, and also at the university where I was the chair of the Computer Equipment Committee. So I did a lot of negotiation with computer companies over that time, and a lot of policy planning.
Right.
And ultimately ended up as a government advisor. I was on the National Procurement Board, which reported to the Hawke Keating government, to the cabinet. I was on that for a while. I was on the major tender boards, the tax department, and for customs and so on, and also an advisor to companies. Some of that spun off into litigation, and so I was an expert witness in many of the landmark computer cases in IP and contract, some of which were the first such cases that have been in Australian courts. And so in a way we were seeing new law, or certainly the judges coping with new technology.
Yep.
So that meant that towards the end of my career, when I was Deputy Dean of Engineering at the University of Melbourne, I also had this other interest and this other involvement. So in 2000, when I was 60, I basically resigned from the university, although I still have honorary appointments there. And my wife, who's an industry luminary, did at the same time. After that, we did some major consulting for computer contracts that had gone belly up in New South Wales. And after that, our work has been voluntary. And I'm still heavily involved in the computer heritage aspect. we produced a book on CSIRAC, and I'm working with the Piercy Foundation, where I'm the chair of the Heritage Committee, and the Piercy Foundation, of course, recognises and awards major people in the computing industry, and we publish materials and do research on our computer heritage. Involved as part of that in a project, for instance, recently at the University of Sydney, where we produced a significant report on issues affecting innovation in Australia from the beginning by interviewing major players who have been recognised by the industry about issues that had assisted them or impeded them in their innovation. So these are people involved in Wi-Fi and major corporations, major successes in Australian history. So that was one of the first landmark cases, landmark studies, where we actually went back to the source and said to people what worked for you, what didn't work, did this help, and so on. And such work's still going on. And so I'm now 85, so I've been in the computer business for about 65 years, and in electronics for longer than that, and still passionate about our computer heritage, but also very passionate about the major problem I see facing Australia, which is how we convert our innovation into productivity rather than just basically developing it and selling it off and then buying the product back. And that's been something I've written about, spoken about over many years, about how we can avoid being a technology colony with a cargo cult, where we think we're very good because we're rapid adopters, but what we rapidly adopt is often things initiated here and then productised overseas, and we buy them back.
Yeah, that's a very noble and very broad area too. So how did you get involved in ACS? I attended the first meeting of the Victorian Computer Society, which was a predecessor of the ACS. The ACS was originally created, the Victorian Computer Society. There was also a South Australian Computer Society in New South Wales. They were the very early precursors. Yep. And I was there on the first day with Trevor Piercy and the other pioneers of the industry. I became quite concerned about social implications of computing and started courses in that. I didn't actually join the ACS for quite a number of years, although I was a frequent participant in conferences and colloquia and a speaker in symposia, partly not much of a joiner. But then about 20 years ago, I suppose, my wife Helen Boroth and I, she had been a member, she'd been a player on various committees, effectively decided to get our act together, and we joined and became, I think, the first couple who became jointly fellows of the ACS. So I've had an observer status of the ACS and over that time, and a degree of participation involved in things like some of the history and attendance in functions. But I guess I'm always concerned to see the ACS become more relevant, more accepted as more relevant in the community, and I guess there's an overlap in the sense that the Piercy Foundation, which was established in honour of Trevor Piercy, the pioneer, does quite a lot of things which should, and in some cases do, overlap with the ACS in terms of heritage, recognising our achievement, advertising our capability, and I think that we probably all share the concern that Australia's capability in this area
is not actually recognised at the policy or the public level at the way it ought to be. And that's an ongoing issue that we all face.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll go back a step there. So what were the impetus in those early days of the Victorian, New South Wales, South Australian societies coming together to form ACS?
I think the computer field has changed. This whole field has changed, which is one of the things that's fascinating about it from a history point of view. But in those early days, the community was fairly small. If we went to a conference, we met people who we knew. The number of computers was fairly small.
Yes.
But we all knew that we were at the beginning of something big. From the computational laboratory in those early 1950s with that valve machine, we knew we were onto something big. We couldn't envisage how big, and I had discussions with Trevor Piercy in those days about how big a computer would have to be to mimic the human brain, right back there in the late 50s, early 60s, and we knew things were going to happen. We didn't anticipate how the development of semiconductor technology would make things affordable, compact, that homes would have them, and so on. Certainly not as quickly as it happened. But we knew in a way we were pioneers, and I think the people who founded the societies, which became the society, knew that this was important. And the problem that faced us then, faced us now, was that there's not a sufficient recognition of the fact that computing, particularly in the commercial world, is not just plumbing. It's not just allowing you to do what you wanted to do anyway, but making sure that it all flows. It's a strategic enabler to do things that in some cases you never thought you could do. And that lack of understanding of that is a frustration for people who see, as I have seen through litigation, numerous litigation at times in court, a lack of understanding of the importance of the capability of the technology at the board level.
Yep.
And a lack of understanding that the input that can be provided by people knowledgeable in the industry is just as important as the accountant, the financial advice to the board and things. And I mean, we can see, and I've seen and written about this, some of the computer disasters we've seen with corporations where there's been inadequate understanding of the importance of what's going on. People haven't, in some cases, pulled the pin because basically the project should have been terminated.
Right.
And they've just gone on, and we can see almost all the time of these projects which started off at $10 million and they end up at $100 million, and nobody's ever really had the insight to what's really going on in the industry because it's developed so quickly.
Sure, yeah. Oh, imagine with that is that as you say, it's developed so quickly. You look at, say, the construction industry, where project management's very well established, well understood discipline. Yeah. It strikes me that in IT, it's not quite there yet.
No, I mean, we did a project at the University of Melbourne with defence. Interesting people in defence who were in charge of a project, but they admitted that they were likely to be relocated every year. So the person who started the project was not going to be there when the project finished. Right. When in some cases, I had a naval officer say to me, well, why is this so complicated, all this software? If I order a winch or something, I say I want a 100-ton winch, and they provide a 100-ton winch. And this software, what's difficult and one saying some of the most complicated things humans have ever done, some of this, and there are methodologies which help us do it better, but the client in these cases is not experienced, and that's one of my long-term concerns in procurement, government procurement, that there's an asymmetry in many cases between the client and the seller. That particularly from the large corporations, the sellers are highly competent, they're experienced, they've spent their lives doing it internationally. And on the other side, in terms of setting up a contract or an agreement or a project, there's often a person who's never done it before. And so it's an asymmetric arrangement. And this means that that projects can just go off the rails because the importance of getting the specification right, the importance of how you're going to handle the relationship, there's a naivety often. And so we have people who are experienced and trained sellers, and often we don't have people who are educated how to be procurers, buyers, in particularly in the government sector. And as I say, I saw this on the National Procurement Board, where I was the person who had the portfolio of IT systems.
Right. So you mentioned before about trying to avoid Australia being a technological colony. How do you see that? How do you see Australia getting out of that trap?
Well, I think there are a number of things. Some of them are depend on the relationship between industry and academia. Some of them, surprisingly, I think might actually depend upon our superannuation scheme. One of the things that's happened in Australia is that a fair part of our personal wealth is in superannuation. We can see this as an argument right now. If let's take, for example, what's happening at the moment, if there were a cap on the amount one could put in superannuation above a certain amount, whatever the dollar number is, the rest of the money would not be in superannuation. People would be investing it in the market or in startups. The responsibility of a superannuation manager is to be prudent, cautious, and long-term. That means that they are not there to take risks. They're not there to buy the first few shares in what might be in 10 startups in the hope that one of them will work. They're there to play straight down the line in conventional blue chips, pretty much. So what if we actually had a cap so that people could say, yes, my future's secure, I have whatever the number, without getting into the political argument, whether it's 3 million, 5 million, 2 million in superannuation, that's fixed. Now I can play. And therefore I could be more venturesome in terms of my investment. And that, I think, could lead to more innovation investment here, just that alone. And on the other hand, what's happening in other countries, in Germany and the US, it's quite expected that academics can have one foot in the academic camp and one foot in industry in some way, in a startup or consultancy. It's sort of allowed here, but has not really ever been encouraged, and it's certainly not going to earn you credit if you're an academic doing the academic credit. You're not likely to be promoted because you've done this. It's not on the score of research papers. As a consequence, there's a tendency to have this silos where the academics they write their papers, which are distributed internationally, and anybody can see them, and so on, and they don't get translated or not immediately and locally into product. So I think that's That's another factor. The other factor, and I don't know how we can overcome this, and perhaps we don't want to, is that actually we're a lucky country.
Yes.
And one can see over and over again that people come up with a new idea, a new product, and my numbers that I quote is 20 million. So a local startup's doing very well. They've got a very nice product. It's selling around the world. Somebody internationally offers them 20 million. They take the 20 million and they go surfing.
Right. Yeah.
Because it's a comfortable country.
Sure.
And we don't have that desire that for many people that they want to become leaders of the world or anything like that. It's enough.
Yeah, it's a comfortable amount. You can.
Yeah. And I was talking to a colleague about this the other day, and they said, "Oh, but I saw the latest thing. They sold for 40 million. How many people were involved? Oh, there was a couple of them. Yeah, 20 million. It's just that's the sort of the number.
Yeah.
And now I'm not saying that I want us to be less attractive for people to have nice lifestyle, but I think that's a factor. That is undoubtedly we are a comfy country, and from at that level, not for everybody, of course, but for the people who are in that situation. So I think that there are strategies that we could adopt, including much more concern about government purchasing. Government purchasing is a huge lever. The amount, I don't just mean federal, I mean at 3 levels of government.
Yes.
Government purchasing is a huge lever, and there are inherent disadvantages for locals in government in trying to sell to government. And as I say, this is my brief on the National Procurement Board and Australian Content Committee and so on. One of them is that the sales capability of the practice people overseas, and you'll see the local startup doesn't have it. Right down to the fact that, I've had people in government say to me, look, I'm dealing with this company. If I keep dealing with them, I'll get a trip to California.
Yep.
And if I deal with this other company, I'll get a trip to Melbourne and a pizza for lunch.
Yes. Yep.
And the overseas company has got all this fantastic presentation material. And sometimes when you dig down, they're working out of a garage as well in California, but it looks good. So there's a very great selling capability. So that's one thing. The other is, and only recently have we really got on top of this, is the tax system. It's quite clear that for many years, transnational corporations paid transfer pricing in Australia at a great level. And this meant that if you had a local company that was intending to pay its taxes here, they were competing with a company which was not intending to pay tax. So they already had a significant advantage.
Yes.
And I was cheeky enough to suggest at one stage that the government shouldn't be dealing with people who were technically insolvent in Australia, because you looked at a number of the companies and their branches basically had made no profit and had no capital here.
No, that's very true. What was the response when you suggested that?
Gradually we have done better in terms of transfer pricing, but I'm talking back in the 80s and the 90s, and I was arguing this. And we actually ran a summary way back on the situation that faces a government agency. So government, let's say we're talking about a small deal, say, but use $1 million as the round figure. So the government agency's got 2 tenders. One is from a local company for $1 million. The other is from an international company for $950,000, right? They're bound pretty much to take the lower bid.
Sure.
If you actually unpick that lower bid, you'll find we could get the number up that it might well cost by comparison in the long term $1.8 million to service that for that overseas, because there would be inevitably overseas experts who would have to come. They would travel in those days on American Airline, stay in an American-based hotel,
Yep.
pay their tax back to America, say, if it was a US company,
Yep.
and all spares, all follow-up, all materials, and so on would come, and that would into all the add-ons. So the whole of it was difficult to do whole life calculations, but if you did them, in some cases you could see that. But the upfront cost, so the cost to the nation could still be contained. So it could be much greater than the cost to the agency.
The multiplier effect.
So you've got this multiplier effect.
Yeah.
So that was one thing. The other was the comfort factor that, this is a proven company, although sometimes they are not. And the other, in some cases, was just lobbying and political influence.
Sure.
And which a small startup doesn't have the time or the energy to do. They're concentrating on the product.
Yes.
And it might be a very good product. I mean, we have one case in one of the major tenders I was involved in where it's a security product, and we realised that there was a local product which was pretty much there. It ticked 90% of the boxes, but not quite.
Yep.
And I looked at it and realised it had been passed over successively for government purchases because it didn't quite make it.
Right.
And what they needed was a little bit of technical input, and they need to make their first sale.
Right.
And once they made that, they were going to be right. So we organised a consultancy basically with our security organisation and with potential clients, and said, look, you've got this thing nearly there. And once you get a government customer, you're going to be right. Help them over the line for the next time they came round to bid.
Yep.
And the company wrote to the minister and said this is the first time they've really been helped by government, and they got the next tender. It was called what I called the just not in time syndrome. They couldn't quite get it there.
Yeah.
And all they needed was a bit of input. And meanwhile, they're just losing. Now, that's intelligent use of our national capability.
Yep.
And one that can actually make the difference between the local success. But if you're trying to sell overseas and you're asked, well, is the Australian government buying your product? No. Well, why should we?
Yeah.
And particularly at the big M, where we've had some very great capability. So once again, there are a whole lot of these factors which can be, if we can improve our local procurement and our local understanding of the industry, then we have the prospect of improving it greatly. I suggested, I left the university before I actually managed to implement it, that it would be a very productive thing for a university department or whatever to establish a course in being a buyer.
Right.
Where people could talk about, as I used to teach my students, about the sales ploys that you're facing, the traps in it, what's necessary in specification, the front end of a project, right before you're actually getting into the nuts and bolts of running it, and what then to track. One of the projects we did, we talked to the client and said, well, this has gone off the rails. What happened in the review meetings? And they said, they're all arguing about
what version of the compiler to use, so we just tuned out. We said, but we are asking about timelines, you know, budget,
Yeah.
and the fit. Oh, no, it's all too technical for us. We say, that's your job as the client. You're not worried about what version of the compiler they're using. You're worried about these fundamental, the iron triangle.
Yep.
Oh, well, we didn't sort of know that. So you realise these are people running multi-million-dollar clients, multi-million-dollar projects. So training and raising the whole profile of buying as distinct from selling. Selling's always people selling drive the shiny cars, got the nice suits. People buying, it's often seen as somebody in a grey coat who's just ticking the boxes.
Yeah, in a cheap suit.
And it's not. It's an asymmetric relationship, and yet it should be. It's really important to our national future.
Well, on that, let's turn to the future there, because what you're describing, and funny enough, as we're carrying out this interview, there's a lot of hype about AI, and you're seeing a lot of the software vendors pushing that AI is going to revolutionise the workplace and so on, and you do really get that sense that it is those folk in shiny suits that are promising the world to the vendors, whether they're government or private sector, and you do get the sense that some of these boards are being a little bit, should we say, oversold on these things. Where do you see this going?
I think my concern is that the lessons we learn are very expensive. I've been involved in a few projects where the board signed off on 10 million, and in the end we're facing the thick end of 100.
Right.
And everybody goes to court or whatever. Lawyers do pretty well. Expert witnesses do pretty well. And maybe people get sacked, and then it happens again over there, and nobody's ever learned.
Right. Yes.
And so, I think we need far more awareness of a number of things. We need there needs to be an understanding of what are the soft spots in any of these things. I think there needs to be an understanding that often at the beginning of projects, nobody actually knows how hard it's going to be.
Sure.
Nobody knows exactly what the cost is going to be, and that you should proceed stepwise in this and maybe do some preliminary trials that you should perhaps have a clearer distinction between the architect and the builder, and that there are people who've got expertise in each of those.
Yep.
And a much more cautious approach, whereas there was a tendency for somebody to say, we need a new, whatever it is, billing system for a water company or something like that. So we have one in Melbourne that's got problems at the moment. And and there really needs to be fairly tight scrutiny about the reality of all the assumptions at the start. And maybe you need a black team who comes in and looks over it. I mean, when I was involved in the re-equipment of the ATO in the tender board in the late 80s, it was undoubtedly the best tender process I've ever seen. It was scrupulous and very well done. And they had a black team who actually spoke to the committee who was doing this every now and then and said, these are the things where we're concerned as to whether this process is being absolutely perfect.
Right.
Whether that communication there could have been misinterpreted or anything like that. Knowing that the natural fate of these big projects is off the track.
Sure.
It's not walking down a broad highway. You're on the ridge of a mountain, and if you take one step, you'll fall off the other side. So,
right.
So the natural it's not that you can sit back comfortably and it'll all run. It's constant vigilance,
Right.
and pulling the pin is a prospect at every stage. It might be better than going on. Maybe sticking with what you've got and reviewing where you're at. And I think there is a tendency just for these things, people say, right, we've got the providers, we've got our team here, we just let it run, and then, it goes pear-shaped, and then everybody's blaming everybody else.
5 years later, you've got your $100 million in the hole, and no one wants it. Classic sunk cost fallacy.
Yeah.
So where do you see ACS's role in the future of where we're going in the tech sector?
I think, so I think some of my colleagues share this. I think ACS needs to play a bigger role. I think it needs to have a wider view of policy, of national policy, and looking at the major issues that face the country. It seems to me that it's a bit like a ship. I'm a sailor, but you've got down in the engine room, you've got people making sure everything runs at ACS, and that the recruitment and the enrolment, and the students and all that sort of thing runs along. That's fundamental, and it runs and is probably fairly standard for an organisation such as this. And that should sort of not take care of itself, but that should be that should run. The really adventurous stuff is at the top end. Is where one actually says, okay, we're going to start a whole national conversation on procurement.
Right.
We're going to start a national, and it's going to be not an ACS conversation. We are going to be, and I think you can see PSC has done this with Australia 4 and the whole energy thing. It said, this is a major challenge facing us, and we can see it politically, it's been a challenge. Whether how we're going to handle distributed, it's like the difference between the old telephone network and the internet. We're moving from that in electricity. We're moving from a tree-structured system to a multi-provider, multi-sync sort of system with all the renewables. So PSC's, Wayne and others said, okay, this IT is going to play a major role in this. The only way we can handle this very complicated network, we've got world-class researchers here, let's get them all together. Now, I think it's the big projects. So I guess I'd argue for the ACS to have more courage.
Right. That's
okay, more courage, and try and more courage to be seen as the independent, non-aligned sort of auspice for the kind of debate. So not saying we need to employ more IT people, it's not a sort of union type thing like that, or we need more investment or anything like that. Let's get the major players to talk about this in public forums, which is what PSC's done with Australia 4.
Yes.
So the PSC, there's probably different views in PSC as to whether we should go this way. That's not the point. The thing is, let's get the best experts from different from academia, from AEMO, and all that sort of thing, and let's have speaks. We don't do that enough in Australia, and you've got to keep these issues out of the political weeds. When they end up as if they end up as a debate in Parliament with people who only been partly briefed, that's not what you want.
Sure. Yeah.
And if at the end of it, one can go to all political parties and say, these are the experts. If you move in this policy direction, you can say you've got a whole lot of expertise behind you. This is not a political lobbying exercise where somebody's told you you've got to do this, you've got to do this. You're going to have wide support because
we've done the homework.
Yeah. Good point. So to conclude, Peter, what's your advice to somebody who's looking at entering the industry today?
Oh, it's almost impossible not to enter it in some way. I mean, yeah. Well, the obvious thing is it's not going to be, your career is not, unless you go into a very, very quiet corner, it's going to vary enormously. I mean, I started off with valve, vacuum tubes, with machines that ran 1,000 operations a second, and in my lifetime we've seen this come this far. It's that one has to expect one's going to have a different range of jobs.
Yeah.
I think one's going to have to probably expect that one's going to need to be either maintain one's education or be re-educated in some way.
Yep.
And I think one has to also think that one's very fortunate to be in a country which has got the capability that we have, and that the evidence is that the people here have the capability. I mean, the last time I looked, there were 25,000 Australians in Silicon Valley.
Yep.
Now that's a credit in some ways. It's a bad thing.
Yep.
In others,
Yep.
We probably send more people to Silicon Valley each year, we have in the past, than we actually teach.
Yep.
Certainly that we teach at the graduate level.
Yeah. It's quite the brain drain. Yeah. Well,
yeah.
Peter, well, thank you very much for your time. It has been a very interesting journey and a very enlightening conversation. Thank you very much.
Right, you're welcome.